Welcome to Gail's Kitchen. Today we're making focaccia bread, and we're going to have fun with focaccia bread today because we're going to bake it two ways, and we're also going to knead it two ways. So I've measured out a tablespoon of yeast. To this we're going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and 1 cup of warm water. Warm water is warm, lukewarm. It's not hot. Yeast is alive, so if it's too hot, it will kill the yeast. If you can stick your finger in there and it's comfortable, that's the temperature that you want. So we're going to pour this in and just stir this until the sugar and the yeast are dissolved. We're going to let this sit for 10 minutes until it becomes foamy. Our mixture of water and yeast and sugar has sat for 10 minutes and it's nice and foamy or frothy. And we're going to now fold this in to a mixture of 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour and a teaspoon of salt. It's very important in baking, especially bread, that you have the proper amount of flour. It's important that you weigh your flour. I use a scale. If you don't have a scale, you should use the fluff and sprinkle and wipe off the excess method. Whisk together 2.5 cups of flour and a teaspoon of salt. And to this, we are going to fold in our yeast and form a dough. And we're going to also add to this 1 tablespoon of olive oil. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil to our dough. And let's just stir that in. So that is a nice formed dough. For our second dough that we're going to knead by hand, we're going to measure out our 2.5 cups of flour, and we're going to remove about 1/2 cup of that, because when we knead by hand, this is a sticky dough, and we're going to need to cover the dough with flour. We're going to need to cover our fingers and our work surface with flour. It's so important with bread that you have the right ratio of dry to wet ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and remove 1/2 cup. And of course, this is not exact. It doesn't matter. We've already weighed our flour, and I know in total we have the correct amount. So I'm just going to hold this aside. I'm just going to put it over here, and we will use this as we go along kneading. So this is our second dough. I'm going to mix the salt in with the flour. Our yeast, sugar, and water mixture is nice and foamy, so let's go ahead and pour that in. It's important with dough to be gentle, so we're just going to very gently fold in our water and yeast and sugar until all of that flour is wet. And we're going to pour in our 1 tablespoon of olive oil. And we're going to go back to our first dough, which we're going to knead in the stand mixer. I'm using a KitchenAid. It usually takes about 2 minutes with the KitchenAid. All stand mixers have instructions on what speed to use for kneading. And this KitchenAid, you're going to knead on speed 2. So your stand mixer should tell you what speed to use. And 2 is a very slow speed. So we're going to knead this for 2 minutes. And now we're just going to transfer it to a greased bowl. We're going to place our dough in a warm area that's about 70 degrees. Ideally, it should be at least 68 degrees, but 70 is ideal. This dough will sit and rise for 40 to 45 minutes. And it should double in size. And then we're going to take this loaf and we're going to bake it on a pizza stone and put toppings of peppers and onions. I might go out in the rain and pick some asparagus spears. I'm going to cover this, put it in a warm place while we get back to our second dough and show you how we hand knead it. So the first thing we're going to do is put a little flour on our surface, all over our fingers. and that's why I'm wearing my special kneading shirt. You know how athletes have their rituals they go through for good luck before their big game? My bread making ritual is to wear a big loose black shirt so I can get flour all over myself and be proud that I made a nice loaf of dough. Let's move this dough in here. Now remember this dough, because we were hand kneading it, we held out about a half a cup of flour. It's very important in bread making that the flour to liquid ratio remains what's in the recipe, unless the recipe notes otherwise. So we weighed out our 2.5 cups of flour, and then I just removed about a half a cup, which I know we're going to incorporate this back in here. So we'll end up with the same amount that the recipe called for. And we are just going to take this very gently and just make it into kind of a rectangle. The first step is to pick this up using your fingers as a paddle. Keep them closed, because what we don't want to do is work this dough or overwork this dough, so we don't want to be sticking our fingers in the dough. So I like to keep my fingers together and fold that in half towards us. Then using the palm of your hands, very gently just push or roll the dough and then turn it and repeat. Fold in half, bring it up towards you, use your palms and just very gently push it. Turn it, fold, roll. Turn it, fold, roll. Turn it, fold, roll. And what we're doing is kneading very gently for about 8 to 10 minutes. And I know that sounds like an eternity, but I'm watching the birds out the window, so when I look away from the camera, I'm usually spotting a bird, which this week is migration week, and what I have seen so far are 2 male rose-breasted grosbeaks and a female, and a black-throated blue warbler. So this is not a difficult process. It's may seem tedious, but you can certainly make it enjoyable. And of course, you're going to have a nice loaf of bread when you're done. So that's starting to stick to our surface, so I'm going to come back in here. Now, a lot of doughs, you don't want to incorporate extra flour at all, so that's why we held some out. I'm just going to roll it around on that, and then going to pick up that end and fold it onto itself, and then just push it. Turn it, fold it onto itself, and gently push it. We're not forcing anything, we're just pushing it. And this process is forming the gluten strands, which the stand mixer made haste and did in 2 minutes. But it's actually a very relaxing process. And think about, something nice, how you're going to decorate your bread. So this is a sticky dough, and that's, knowing that this is such a sticky dough, I held out that half a cup, and it's starting to stick to my hand. So what you don't want to do as a bread baker is wet your hands. We do what's called the flour wash, where we wash that flour off with dry flour. And you see this flour is going to be all over me, which I kind of like. Now, how do we know that the bread is done? You could obviously set a timer, or you could set a playlist for 8 minutes, and then you would know that it's 8 minutes. But an important way is to take the dough and push on it. And when it's springy, when it springs back, that's good enough. So we're going to transfer this to a greased bowl, put it up in a 70-degree location and let it rise for 40 minutes. And we're coming back to dough number 1. We're going to shake dough number 1 and we're going to cook that on a pizza stone. Okay, this dough rose for about 45 minutes and you see it doubled in size. This is the one that we kneaded with the stand mixer. This is a delightful tender crumb bread. I just love it. It is just wonderful. So I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of cornmeal and put on a well-oiled pizza stone. Now my pizza stone I use just about every morning for toast and it is covered in butter, so I know it's well-oiled. This part doesn't have to be exact. This is a little heavy with the cornmeal, but it just gives it a little crunchy texture on the bottom. Let's use a piece of plastic and get this dough out of here. So we're going to just start pushing the dough out very gently. You can use a pizza stone, you can use a cookie sheet, works great. That's what we're going to use on our next dough. Once you get it into about the basic shape that you want, you're going to put a couple of tablespoons of oil on here. Put 1 to begin with, and that's just going to help us to push this out. So I'm just very gently pushing that dough from the center out. It's a very soft dough, it's a very elastic dough, so it's easy to work with. And just push it out and just try to get even thickness. You can come back and toss some Parmesan cheese on here. You can use some mozzarella if you want. I tend to stick with the Parmesan and some Italian seasonings. And then you can put whatever toppings you want. First, we're going to put another tablespoon of oil on the surface. And just spread that out. We're going to bake this for about 15 minutes or until it turns a light golden brown. We don't want this to turn a dark brown, but I like to get that olive oil all the way out to the edge. And then you can top it however you like. I'm going to use about 3 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. And we'll just sprinkle that over. I'm going to use a combination of Italian seasonings. You can use whatever seasonings you like. Some thyme, basil. Just cover it with a couple tablespoons or 3 tablespoons. It's however you like it. But the bread is so tasty that I like to just put a little bit to complement the bread, but not overwhelm the bread. I'm going to put a couple of pieces of onion on here. You can just lay the onion rings. You could make this into flowers. You can make it as fancy as you want. Lay some of the spinach and mustard leaves and make it look like flowers. And I'll take these asparagus spears and make them into stalks for my flowers. Take some pepper strips and you could shape them as flowers if you want, or just lay them out in any design that makes you happy. You can be as artistic as you want with this, or you could just lay the peppers out however you want. They don't have to be any particular way. So I'm not really trying to make anything in particular, but you can make it pretty if you want to. Today I'm going to use convection baking for this focaccia bread. For convection, it's 400 degrees for 15 minutes. I'm a huge fan of convection baking. It cuts down the temperature by about 10% and it cuts the cooking time down by about 25%. So if you're using conventional oven, you would use 450 degrees and you would bake it for about 20 minutes. I'm going to stick this in the oven for 15 minutes and I'm going to check it and make sure it's just very lightly golden brown, and we'll be back. Our focaccia baked for 15 minutes exactly, and it's a nice golden brown around the edges. This is one bread you don't want it to brown up very much. I'm going to transfer this to a cooling rack, and then we're going to go ahead and make our second loaf the traditional way without toppings. So this is the dough that we kneaded by hand, and it has risen for about 45 minutes. I'm going to bake this loaf the way I love focaccia bread. I'm going to use a cookie sheet and I'm going to put oil on the bottom, and then I'm just going to stretch this out. I'll show you how we stretch it out to fit the pan. We're going to cover it with a couple more tablespoons of olive oil and a little water and some salt, and we'll bake this one up. Pour about a tablespoon or so of olive oil on your cookie sheet. Then grab this dough out of here. And I like to have my fingers well covered with the oil because, of course, this is a sticky dough. And I'm just going to start shaping it. I'm going to start pushing it out to the edges. I'm using the palm of my hand to push it out in this direction, and then I'm using my fingertips to push it that direction. It's sort of a stretching process, and it's a very elastic dough. As you see, it's springing back. So we have it stretched out pretty good. We're just going to cover it with a little more oil. Just use my hands. And then I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of water, warm water on here. No more than a couple teaspoons. Just spread that all around. Take my fingertips and I'm going to push this bread. And I'm making little indentations in it. Push this bread. I'm just going to sprinkle some salt on here, and we're going to bake it the same way we did the other one. I'm using convection baking today, so I'm using the second from the bottom rack, and I'm using 400 degrees convection for 15 minutes. If you're using a conventional oven, it would be 450 degrees for closer to 20 minutes. But I would check it around 18 minutes because all ovens do cook differently and there are hot spots, and I probably would turn it halfway through. I'm a huge proponent of convection baking. If you've never tried it, it's definitely a little bit different, and it takes a little bit to get used to. But the advantages of convection baking are the cook time is reduced by about 25%, and the oven temperature is decreased by about 10%, and that's why we're going to bake it at 400 degrees convection. This is our second focaccia bread, and this is one where we cooked without any toppings, but we put olive oil and salt on the top, and we kind of dimpled the bread with our fingertips. Still nice and warm. This is best eaten warm. It's such a delightful bread. That's how the bottom looks, that structure, the holes in the bread. It's a very tender bread. It just lightly browns on the bottom. The first bread we baked used the cornmeal on the bottom. So it looks a little different. That's cool. Let's look at that. So this is the first focaccia we baked, and it's not as brown because we put the golden cornmeal on the bottom. So this is such a delightful bread. I like to make it in this shape, and when I have leftover, I cut strips, and then I will wrap that in tin foil and put put some butter and garlic between the sides and use it as a garlic bread. This bread is good anytime, breakfast, lunch, dinner, or just for a snack. Enjoy making focaccia.